On June 8, 793, a monastery on a tidal island off the coast of Northumbria became the symbol of a new age of fear. Lindisfarne was not just a remote religious house. It was a holy center tied to Saint Cuthbert, to manuscript art, to prayer, learning, land, and royal patronage. When raiders arrived from the sea, the violence was shocking because it struck a place that many Christians understood as sacred and protected, and because it revealed how exposed the wealthy coasts of early medieval Europe could be. The island itself shaped the story. Lindisfarne sits near the Northumbrian coast, reachable across sands and causeways when the tide allows, but separated by water and weather at other times. That geography made it a place of retreat and holiness. It also made it visible from the sea. Monks there preserved books, tended relics, hosted pilgrims, and stood inside a wider network of kings, bishops, estates, and gifts. The treasures of a monastery were not simply gold. They included costly vessels, decorated manuscripts, fine cloth, livestock, food stores, and the authority that came from sacred reputation. Northumbria in the 8th century was one of the major powers of Anglo-Saxon England. Its monasteries were intellectual engines as well as religious communities. The Lindisfarne Gospels, created earlier in the same broad monastic world, show the scale of skill and devotion associated with the place. Intricate color, interlaced design, and script that turned a book into both scripture and treasure. To attack such a community was therefore not the same as robbing an isolated farm. It was an attack on a visible node of faith, wealth, literacy, and regional identity. The raiders who came to Lindisfarne were part of a Scandinavian world that was changing. Seaborne travel in the North Sea was not new. Trade, migration, and raiding had long overlapped in northern waters. But in the late 8th century, fast ships, local knowledge, political opportunity, and the attraction of portable wealth made coastal targets especially vulnerable. Monasteries were tempting because they concentrated objects of value while usually lacking the defenses of a fortress. The sea that connected islands, markets, and kingdoms also carried sudden danger. The surviving accounts do not give us a modern battlefield report. They give us shock, memory, and interpretation. The Anglo-Saxon chronicle tradition records terrible signs and a devastating raid on the church of Lindisfarne. Alcuin of York, writing from the world of Carolingian learning, treated the attack as a spiritual and political catastrophe. His words mattered because he was not describing only lost property. He was asking how such violence could happen to a holy place, and what it revealed about sin, kingship, order, and divine warning. That language can sound distant today, but it helps explain why Lindisfarne became so famous. Early medieval people did not separate politics, whether war and divine meaning the way a modern report might. A raid could be read as military violence, social breakdown, and religious sign all at once. The horror came from the crossing of boundaries. Outsiders from the sea entering a sacred enclosure, killing or carrying off people, taking holy objects, and turning a sanctuary into a scene of vulnerability. We should also be careful with a common myth. Lindisfarne was not the first act of Scandinavian violence in all of Europe, and it did not instantly create the full Viking Age by itself. There were earlier raids and contacts, and the great armies, settlements, and political transformations of the 9th century came later. What Lindisfarne did was become an unforgettable marker in English and European memory. It announced, with unusual clarity, that the wealth of the Christian coast could be reached by ships before local power could respond. The practical lesson was harsh. A monastery might have spiritual prestige, but prestige did not stop a landing party. A royal patron might be powerful inland, but ships could choose the time and place of attack. Coastal communities began to face a strategic problem that would grow over the next generations. How to defend long shorelines, river mouths, islands, and ecclesiastical centers against mobile raiders who could strike, load valuables, and leave before an army gathered. For the raiders, the raid was part of a world of risk and reward. Portable silver, fine vessels, captives, animals, and fame all mattered. Later Viking activity would include trade, tribute-taking, conquest, settlement, intermarriage, and state building. The word Viking can hide that variety if it is used only to mean pirate. The men who attacked Lindisfarne were violent raiders, but the larger Scandinavian expansion included many forms of movement and negotiation across the North Atlantic and Europe. For Lindisfarne, the damage was real, but the community and its memory did not vanish in a single day. The cult of Saint Cuthbert continued to shape northern English religious life. Monks and guardians of the saint's relics later moved in response to insecurity, and Cuthbert's community became tied to the history of Durham. In that longer story, Lindisfarne is both a wound and a source. It represents the fragility of a holy place, but also the durability of a tradition carried through crisis. The raid's power as a historical hinge comes from scale and symbolism. In military terms, it was a small coastal attack. In cultural terms, it echoed across a world that valued sacred houses as anchors of order. It helped turn seaborne raiding from a local threat into a continental anxiety. After Lindisfarne, the question was no longer whether rich monasteries could be touched. They had been touched, and the written world remembered the shock. When we picture June 8, 793, the most important image is not a fantasy of horned helmets or a neat movie battle. It is a tidal edge, a religious community, ships in cold water, manuscript pages, alarm, smoke, and the collapse of an assumption that holiness and distance could keep violence away. The next checkpoint is the 9th century, when raids widened into winter camps, tribute, armies, and settlement. Lindisfarne did not contain the whole Viking Age. It gave later generations one of its opening symbols.